My friend Keith has an uncle with dementia. Now, long story short, his uncle, let's call him Mick, usually lives with his grandma. But last month, she was in Florida with her church group for a week, and at the same time, Keith had a business trip. So, he hired me to house sit while he was gone. This job included looking after and taking care of Uncle Mick. Keith was only going to be gone for 2 days. On my first day, I mostly just hung out in the backyard, reading and getting some sun, or chilling in the living room watching TV. I cooked a couple of times, and each time, I made extra food for Uncle Mick, but I never saw him come out of his room upstairs. So, I went up, knocked lightly on his door, and just said, "Hey, I made some food if you're hungry." All I heard was this grunting noise from the other side. I just assumed that was his way of acknowledging me. Oddly enough, I'd never actually met his uncle. We weren't introduced when Keith hired me, he just said Uncle Mick was fully aware I'd be there. He never came down to eat while I was in the living room, so when it got late, I went up to the spare room for the night. I left my door cracked open just a bit, so I could listen out for anything. Eventually, I heard a door down the hall open, followed by these unsettlingly quick and heavy footsteps moving down the hall and then down the stairs. Seconds later, I heard the same footsteps rush back up the stairs, back to the room, and the door slammed shut. It was honestly a little unnerving. It's hard to explain, just the intensity of his footsteps, like he was actively avoiding me or something. The next day was pretty much the same as the first. I made 2 meals and left the food on the counter for Uncle Mick. Both times, he ate while I was outside. I was laying in the backyard again when I came back in and saw the plate was empty. So, I figured he was really trying to avoid me. I went back out to tan some more, and as I was settling in, I happened to look up at the bedroom window where Mick was staying. And there he was, just looking at me through the window. I think when he noticed I saw him, he ducked down really fast. I felt so uncomfortable that I folded up my blanket and went back inside, straight up to the spare bedroom. I just told myself, okay, one more night of this, and I'll be home. That night, I made dinner and left him another plate. As I walked up to the spare bedroom, I noticed his door was open now. That was the first time I'd seen it open. Maybe he was becoming less shy, I thought. I decided to brush my teeth and go to my room for the rest of the night to give him his space. But I was having a really rough time sleeping. I just wasn't tired at all. While I was lying there in the dark, I heard this short creaking sound coming from inside my room, even over the noise of the fan next to me. I sat up and looked around. The room was dark, but my eyes had adjusted enough to see. I didn't see anything. More specifically, I didn't see Uncle Mick. I was getting paranoid, honestly. Why was I letting myself get so creeped out by him? I lay back down on my side, facing the wall next to the bed. I tried to ignore the little sounds I thought I was hearing, telling myself it was just in my head. But then, I heard a very faint groan. I sat up and turned off the fan to listen properly. And then I heard it clearly. Breathing. I turned to the far right side of the room, by the desk, and there he was. Sitting on the desk chair, turned to face me. I screamed in absolute fear, and he shot up and came towards me, going shoo, and covered my mouth with his hand. In that split second, I thought he was trying to suffocate me. I pushed him off me with all my strength and ran to the nearest bathroom, slamming and locking the door behind me. I listened as I heard his manic footsteps rush back to his room and his door slam shut again. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I immediately called Keith and told him everything that just happened. The scariest part was that he didn't even sound that shocked. He just told me, "It's best you sleep in the bathroom with the door locked." When he said that, it confirmed my worst fears. It told me that his Uncle Mick was potentially dangerous, which scared me even more. I slept maybe 3 hours max that night, on the cold bathroom floor. In the morning, I quickly packed my backpack and just waited out in the backyard for Keith to return. He paid me extra for what I had to deal with, but I told him he needed to get his uncle some serious help, because I think he has more than just dementia. To this day, I still don't know what his intentions were that night. That whole ordeal reminds me of a true scary story my dad once told us, from when he was in his 20s. Back when he was still living with my grandparents, he lived next door to this older couple in their 60s. One winter, the wife, Margie, went missing. The husband knocked on their door and asked my grandparents if they'd seen her, but unfortunately, they hadn't. Nobody had, apparently. A few days later, my dad was out at the park playing football with his friends. That's when it started to snow. They played in the snow for a while until it got to be too much, and then they all went their separate ways back home. When my dad got home, he realized his parents were out. So, he started the fireplace and went to his room, which was right next to the living room, to throw his stuff on his bed. Then, he went to take a nice warm shower. As he got out of the shower, he thought he heard humming coming from the living room, just outside the bathroom. He opened the door just a crack, still in his towel, and said, "Mom." The humming stopped, but a creaking sound continued. My dad quickly threw on his clothes in the bathroom and walked out into the living room. And there, in my grandpa's old rocking sofa chair, was Margie from next door. She looked straight at my dad and said, "It was so cold. I needed to get warm." My dad, completely freaked out, ran next door to get her husband. But when the two of them returned to the living room, the sofa chair was empty. Margie was gone. The two of them searched the whole house together, calling her name, but she was nowhere to be found. Now, this much of the story was enough to creep me out when my dad told it to us, but it didn't end there. A few weeks later, the snow had finally melted. That's when the police found Margie's body in the woods behind her house. The autopsy revealed she had died from exposure to the cold. But here's the truly chilling part. The coroner determined her time of death was the very first night she went missing. That was weeks before my dad saw her in the living room.